And I'm going back into archives because archives is where I think I'm happiest, Lennie. It's where I find different pieces of paper and weigh all the different kinds of texture, the weight, the smell.
Hello, and welcome to the Edinburgh International Book Festival. And we're broadcasting from our new site at the Edinburgh College of Art, hosted by the University of Edinburgh. It's a new partnership, and very good it is too. My name is Lennie Goodings, and I'm delighted to be here with Edmund de Waal. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Lennie. It's lovely to be here.
And Edmund told me this is his first live show. so we got to be good, guys. This is it. Even though the book came out in May, he's been doing a lot of stuff on Zoom like everybody, but this is the first one with real human beings. So welcome for that. So on your website, you have that you're an artist who writes. And I would add that you are a writer of great artistry. And you're famous for your ceramic art and for your writing, most particularly the memoir, Hare with Amber Eyes, as I'm sure most of you know here. Today, we're here to talk about his new book, and it's letters to, tell me how you pronounce it?
Camondo.
Camondo, which is a sort of companion piece, or one reviewer called it a neighborly book to the Hare, which I thought was quite good, and something that will become evidence soon. So I'm going to start by passing to you, Edmund. So Edmund has a slideshow. Sit back. It's 20 minutes. And it'll take you through the books. And then I'm going to ask some questions, and then we'll open to the floor and to the audience online, too. So over to you.
Thank you, Lennie. Thank you. And thank you. It's an absolute delight to, I can't see you, but I can believe that you're out there as real people. And so, 11 years ago, I published a book called The Hare with Amber Eyes, which was about a story of collecting and about people I loved in the past and about Paris. And I find myself 11 years later back in Paris for this book, back in the same part of Paris, back in the Rue de Monceau, and walking down this street of extraordinarily beautiful houses, this golden hill of houses, down from the house where my Jewish ancestors, the Ephrussi family, lived, just up here on the Rue de Monceau, where Charles Ephrussi lived, this cousin of my grandmother's, who lived there at the end of the 19th century, 1870s, and collected extraordinary, amazing impressionist art and collected these wonderful collection of small Japanese netsuke, these ivory and wooden carvings that I inherited and took me on this road through Paris to Vienna, to Tokyo, to Odessa, and back to London. I'm back, I find myself on the Rue de Monceau, but further down the hill, 10 houses down, in this extraordinary place. And this is the Hotel Camondo. It's a family house. It's cousins of my grandmother's. It's more Ephrussi cousins. And this is the house that Moïse de Camondo, a Jewish family that came from Constantinople at exactly the same moment as my Ephrussi family came from Odessa, exactly the same moment. They arrive in Paris to become Parisian, to become French, to assimilate. And Moïse de Camondo, the scion of this extraordinary Constantinople Jewish family, builds this great house. It's like the Petit Trianon. And when you go in, it is all marble. It's extraordinary. This is the entrance hall. And if you go into there, you go up one staircase into these lavish rooms. But I went up a different way. I go up the back staircase, the service staircase. I go up and up these extraordinary metal stairs to the attics. And the attics are powerful, unchanged places where there are room after room after room. You open one room and it's full of Louis Vuitton trunks from the 1920s. You open another cupboard and it's full of light fittings. You open another room and it's the maid's room, the maid's bathroom. You open another room and it's full of archives. I'm going back into archives. And I'm going back into archives because archives is where I think I'm happiest, Lennie. It's where I find different pieces of paper and weigh all the different kinds of texture, the weight, the smell of different kinds of paper. And I open up Moïse de Camondo, this born in Turkey, this extraordinary new Frenchman, and see what he's collecting. And what he's collecting year after year after year is extraordinary things. Here are amazing records. There are his menus. There is hunting books. There are every single description of every single piece of furniture he buys up in those attics. And here he is, looking rather raffish with his top hat and his one eye because of a hunting accident. Could there be anything more glamorous and Parisian than losing your eye? And this is where he grows up. And like all good Jewish dynastic people in Paris, the Rue de Monceau, at this moment, he has to marry dynastically. And so he marries this extraordinary and beautiful girl. Here she is, painted by Renoir. He marries her when she's 19. It's one of those liaisons that I got to know very well in my Viennese family, where one person has to marry another and have lots of children quickly. And they do. They have 2 children. Here they are. But then she runs away with the riding instructor and has another child. And they have a terrible divorce. And Moïse, here he is with his 2 children, decides to re-change his life without his wife. So he builds the house, and it is wonderful. And it is extraordinary. And what you see when you see this house and you see these great staircases and this great collection of art is you see someone who is very deliberately and powerfully creating an impression of 18th century France. He's building a house in order to give a sense of the most civilized city, the most civilized country, that amazing moment in the Enlightenment when all conversation is possible. And he's doing this because he has a son, Nissim. So when you look around these extraordinary rooms, this is an amazing house, an amazing collection to pass on. He's thinking about inheritance. He's thinking about himself. Here's the extraordinarily beautiful round library, which I adore. And then in the back rooms, the servants' quarters, the butler's things, everything, amazing kitchen, everything perfect for the dinners, the balls, the banquets that he gives. And this makes me cry. These are his menus, which I found in a particularly painful bit of lockdown, and just read and read and read. And here are Moïse's 2 children, as you can see, the son joining the army in the First War, Nissim and Béatrice, the daughter. He's a good French boy. He joins up. And here he is with his father. And then tragedy. In the First War, the Great War, Nissim, the son and heir, is killed, flying an aeroplane, and everything changes. This extraordinary house, which was the inheritance for the son, becomes something utterly different. And this is what we must talk about. It becomes a memorial. It becomes a memorial for his son. Everything suddenly stops in its tracks. Everything cannot be moved. This is his son's bedroom. It becomes a memorial bedroom. And Moïse, as he ages, sits more and more and more in his beautiful porcelain room by himself, thinking about what he wants to do with this house and this collection, this extraordinary collection he has created. And Béatrice, his daughter, marries another good Jewish boy, a cousin of my grandmother's, Léon, a young composer. And they go off and have 2 children and live in another part of Paris. And here, Moïse grows old. And he grows old thinking about what he's going to do with this house. What is he going to do with this collection? And he decides to give it to France, because France is the place that has welcomed him and his family, like so many other Jewish families, like the Rothschilds and the Efroussis and the Count de Hare and all these other great litany of families. They have been welcomed into this great country, civilized country, that allows people to come and become French. And so he gives it, in his will, to France. And on the 21st of December 1936, after he's died, the family meet in the courtyard, and there's the handing over of this extraordinary museum to France. And it's a huge success. The press come. Here's a wonderful picture from that day. And everyone comes. And the children, the remaining daughter, Beatrice, and the grandchildren are there. And it's a great public event. And then you know what happens. You know that while the family are still in Paris, riding and doing all the things that a Parisian family should do, there comes this unthinkable and impossible breakage of everything. The 14th of June, 1940, the Wehrmacht walk unopposed into Paris. The 16th of July, 1940, Vichy France enacts its first denaturalization law. September, there's the first census of the Jews in Paris. And then month after month after month, month after month after month, there is one thing after another. You are then not allowed to own a radio or ride a bicycle. You have to wear a yellow star. There is the building of the concentration camp at Drancy, guarded by French policemen. There is the roundup of 16,000 members of Jewish Parisian life in the Vélodrome d'Hiver. 100 people commit suicide. And day by day by day, there is the stripping away not only of where you can be and how you can be in public and in private, but the stripping away of possessions. And you remember Moïse's wife. This is the family house, which becomes a transit camp in the middle of Paris. And it becomes a place where all the possessions looted from Jewish families get stored, where members of the SS can come and choose things and send them back to Germany. And everything gets stripped away. And the family portrait, this beautiful picture of Irène, Caron d'Aver by Renoir, gets taken from the family flat. Goering briefly chooses it for his own house. She looks Gentile. She's a pretty girl. And then it's passed on into the chain of looted art. And they write and ask for it back. And in those records, in those archives, you begin to see how this family starts to ask, why are we not allowed to have these things? Why are we not allowed to be Parisians? And they are arrested and taken to Drancy. And if you want to know about archives, you look hard at the cards that are created for each person who comes into that camp. And each part of this means something. À ne pas libérer, do not liberate. And the date of the time that Beatrice enters the camp, and you see one after another. This is the granddaughter. And you see here is Léon, the son-in-law, and here is the grandson. And when you see these cards, you understand that you can have archives which record the joys and pleasures and the meals and the acquisitions and the establishing of a family in its place in a city that they love. And then you can find the traces of how that family is stripped away. And all four of the Camondo family are deported to Auschwitz and murdered. And here is the grandson, Bertrand, who was training to become an ébéniste, training how to work with veneers, training in the great art of 18th century furniture making, which is what his grandfather, Moïse, loved. Veneering, putting together those exquisite French artifacts which talk about French civilization. And he dies in Auschwitz. And the house is left untouched. It's left untouched during the occupation, and after the war, it resumes its place as the Musée Camondo, a place where you can go and look at 18th century French art. And just under the plaque, which says that this is a museum given in honor of Nissim de Camondo, who left his life for France during the Great War, is a smaller plaque, which says that these four members of the family died for France. Discuss. And when you go around the house, you open one room, and this is her bathroom, and it is untouched. And you enter another room, and all you see are shadows. And so I write a book of letters to Moïse about his archives, about belonging, about memorial.
Thank you. This is an amazing book, as you can, some of you may have read it already, but as you can tell, even just from the pictures, it's extraordinary beauty, but outrageous tragedy at the same time, as you've shown. And it's moving, it's enraging, it's sad. Thank you.
Thank you.
So tell us about how it got started, because you were telling me earlier that it has some COVID beginnings, as many of our recent creations do, don't they? This wasn't a book you planned to write.
No, I didn't plan to write it, and it's an unintentional book, which I kind of love, more particularly, I think, because I've been going to this museum, the Camondo, for years, and I know it and love it, and I'd been asked and invited to do an exhibition there. Mm. And it's a great honor because no one has done anything in it since 36. So it's a huge honor. And I was there in the studio, and then COVID. And so I was alone for the first time in the studio for decades. You know, no helpful people, no phone, no travel. And I really found, and no going to Paris, that I started to talk to him, Moïse. And then it became a letter, and then another letter. And then over the months, it sort of became a real conversation with him and with myself about what he had done, and I just felt very close to this whole quest, to all the things that he was trying to do, and to this tragedy about memorial, making a memorial, which then changes its shape so tragically.
Yeah, and that is exactly right, because the whole story it's about a tug, isn't it, between collection and dispersion, and in the holding of collection. And also the stipulation that he left was that nothing could be changed. But of course, everything was changed, wasn't it?
It's kind of extraordinary because there he is. He says, pull the blinds down on sunny days.
Dust.
No dust. Everything must be beautifully kept. Don't lend anything.
No.
I mean, no diaspora. Don't lend anything at all. And also don't bring anything in. And as you say, all these strictures, controlling, because he wants to hand this beautiful image of the house over. And of course, everything is utterly, profoundly different.
Yeah. Dispersed and destroyed. And there are many people you quote in this book, but Walter Benjamin was one I was really drawn to as the philosopher. And you talk about, just before we get to the decimation, the sort of the happiness of collecting. And he says the happiness of collecting is that of a tete-a-tete with things. The great collector is struck by the confusion, by the scatter in which things of the world are found. And I found that the psyche of the collector really fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, it is, I always say I don't collect, which is such a lie. I mean, it's such a profound, we're not filmed, are we?
Nope.
Just going public on this. But I mean, so that's such a beautiful quote. It's about the dispersion of the world. So you look at the world, and the world is chaotic. It's full of disparate, complicated things. And the collector tries to make patterns and bring things back together, or bring them together for the first time and find the energies that can exist between things. So, he makes a porcelain room, my hero. He makes a room where all these different pieces of Sèvres which have been dispersed can be brought back together. Or he finds a cabinet that was in the one of the suite of rooms in Versailles and finds the 2 candelabra that used to be on it before the revolution. And it takes him 30 years, but he does it. And so that pleasure, that tête-à-tête, that feeling of intimacy with objects is very interesting because, of course, it's about objecthood, it's about enjoying the thisness of the objects, the weight and the tactility and the warmth and and all that glorious aura of objects. But it's also about storytelling. It's also absolutely at its heart about storytelling. He wants to bring back these bits of furniture because he adores Madame de Pompadour. Or he makes that porcelain room because he's got this dream of having Montaigne to dinner and sitting down and talking to him about essays. He's living storytelling through his objects. That's why it's such an unbelievably bloody beautiful house.
It's extraordinary. I mean, you've got pictures in here, but to see them on the slide,
they're bigger than that in real life.
It's breathtaking.
It's big. It's big.
But we were talking earlier about assimilation, because obviously one of the he felt himself to be a Parisian by the end of his life, didn't he? And we were talking about how particular is collecting to somebody who wants to assimilate, who wants to fit into a different society from the one they're born.
Well, I mean, this is my special subject.
Okay, off we go then.
I don't know how long we've got, because there's a particular route that I've gone down in my books, which is to look at. It just happens that a bit of my family is Jewish, and it just happens that they were attempting hugely successfully for a while to become Parisian and become Viennese, and in the case of my great-uncle, become a resident of Tokyo, or in my grandmother's case, a resident of Tunbridge Wells. So what I see in that, and my father as well, what I see in that particular line of the family, which I feel very close to, are people who do adapt the ways that they live, the objects that surround them, in order to sort of, in some ways, disappear into society. I think of my grandmother sort of failing to do that in Tunbridge Wells because all her books were French and German, and I think that slightly surprised people when they came to tea. But that feeling of assimilation is really interesting. It's really, really interesting because it's about holding true to who you are, but also being hugely aware of the circumstances in which you find yourself. And it's a sort of push and pull the whole time. And then when it collapses, and it collapses in 1940 or it collapses in 1938 at the Anschluss, that the violence with which people want to strip away and say you do not belong. You might have grown up here or had children here or speak the language beautifully or given things to museums or write amazing books here in the language or love this place. In the case of Vienna, absolutely love this place. But actually, you do not belong. We own the story. You do not. You may have tried to become Viennese or Parisian, but actually you do not own that trajectory. So
the objects are taken away.
And then it's all about looting, and it's simultaneously, just said this about objects of storytelling. So it's not just stealing stuff, though that, God help us, is heinous. What you're doing when you're stripping. It doesn't matter if you're stripping a palais of its old master paintings, or if you're stripping a one-room flat in the Marais of absolutely everything you own. What you're doing is you're saying you are rootless. You're stripping away the story of where you are as a family from that person. And then when you've done that, then that person is deracinated, and you can do with them what you want. You can stamp a card, you can put them on a train, you can do all those other things. So objects matter because they are witness. They are witness to what happens. And it really, truly, truly doesn't matter if it's a Renoir portrait of a girl, or whether it's a battered Torah in a one-room flat in the Marais, or whatever. It really doesn't matter. It's not about hierarchies.
It's also about touch, isn't it? And Proust features here too.
He does turn up.
He does turn up, and because he's a neighbor,
yeah,
as well, isn't he? And he sends a sympathetic letter to the family when they lose their son in the war. But he's somebody you seem to warm to. And one of the things is you quote him very approvingly about touch, don't you? He says, "Touch leads to perceptions towards objects close to the heart of things." And I like that idea that there is a heart in a cold object, really.
Yeah, I mean, I do make pots. I kind of believe in the heart of objects.
Yeah.
And I still believe that there's a sort of, and I can never really fathom this. I think this is a kind of life mission complication thing for me, which is that objects do somehow still retain some kind of pulse of their making, and still retain something about how the hands that they've gone through. And you can call that naive and romantic and all kinds, and people have much ruder things than that. But there is something profoundly affecting about handling an object that has gone through so many other people's lives. There really is. And I do believe you can think about it and take care of it and understand it and storytell around it if you give it enough space and attention.
So that's interesting, because the next thing I loved about the book is how you talked about the objects in terms of arranging them. So, and you talked about them almost in a magical way, as you just said, but also musical. So, because you talk at one point, he talks about putting things next to each other and then watching them. I thought that was really interesting. And then when you say when it's right, the cadences keep going.
I love the fact you've read my book. In fact, I would like to point out at the moment that Lennie is my best actual reader, not only my best interlocutor, but the post-it stickers. So yeah, and the music thing. I mean, with my pots, I put them together in groupings and grandly installations, but they are just basically groupings of things. And there is that sort of energy between things where there are cadences. I do it on this scale. I mean, Moïse did it as a whole house, so that you move between one room and another, and then you think, oh, hang on, 2 rooms back, he was doing something slightly different, and now it's changed. And so it's a beautiful sort of fugue where you pick up on one thing and put it down, and then pick up another thing, or the same thing, and then change it. So it really is profoundly musical. It really works. It really works.
And so in your home, do you change things around a lot? Do you make them sing?
In my studio, I try and do that. I try and do that. And at the moment, of course, what I'm doing is trying to make things for this exhibition, which is now 18 months late, but it's
tell us about the exhibition.
October the 7th. It starts, and it's going to go on until May.
But this is a big thing, isn't it?
It's a huge deal.
This house was given to Paris with the strict instruction: nothing changes.
Yeah.
And now you're the first one going in to make changes.
So I've been told I can do it, and then that's it. So what I'm doing is I'm not moving anything. So what I'm doing is re-inhabiting things. So I've been writing into porcelain, some of these letters into porcelain, into very thin pieces of porcelain. I've been writing letters, and they're going to be sort of stacked on Moïse's desk, and there's going to be a few bowls of broken shards. Brokenness is really interesting, that runs through. And so there are kind of moments throughout the house where I'm sort of reflecting on family life, actually, and on the fact that actually this may be a museum, but it's still a living house for a lost family, and that comes out of feeling angry as well. I mean, white hot anger about the way in which somehow France has never really taken cognizance of the fact that it orchestrated the destruction of all these Jewish families, that actually it rounded up with with French policemen and on French buses to a French deportation camp, and in French trains, and that it was systematic, and that the French press, was rabidly anti-Semitic, and that it's and that this whole terrible chapter in French history comes out of a bubbling anti-Semitism from the 19th century, from the Dreyfus affair into all the kind of appalling 20s and 30s, and then into that sort of black flowering of this.
But it's interesting to me that you want to go back into it as opposed to, stay in the other countries that you've lived in. I know you grew up in lots of different countries, but are you looking for some kind of repair or some kind of apology, or what do you personally get out of it?
So I think what I'm doing and why I'm doing it is I think there's a story which hasn't been told, and I think that's what I do. So I'm not looking for repairing things. I don't think that's possible. No. I don't think it's appropriate. But I think looking clearly at what happened is necessary. The way I do it is by looking at objects and family histories and collecting and how families work And this is part of that whole thing for me. Why do I do it? I do it, I think I say somewhere in the book, because it's not finished. Because it is sort of unfinishable. And that's not sort of going back and doing and sort of j'accusing at all. It's much more complicated than that. It's more a question of picking things up again and looking at what hasn't been weighed in your hands. It's going back into the archives again and seeing what has been erased or effaced or misfiled, and going, actually, there are all kinds of fissile, complex stories about belonging that are still utterly live for us now, for our generations, and for our children's generation, about how we understand those who live next to us, who have just arrived or have become citizens or are trying to become citizens, those people who've crossed borders, what they give to us. It's about migratory lives and migratory stories. And absolutely it's about language. It's about how dangerous the language of othering other people, of saying that they're different, is how toxic and dangerous that is. So that's at the heart of it. Okay. So I did this whole Library of Exile project. Where I started a whole library, began in Venice in 2019. 2,000 books written by refugees and exiles, from Ovid to tragically Afghan writers and Syrian writers. 2,000 books, which then this whole library went to Dresden and then to the British Museum. And each time it moved, there was an ex libris plate in all these books, 70 languages, 90 countries, all of them. You could write your name in a book if it mattered to you. You could suggest books. It's all about keeping alive the idea that actually where you come from and where you move to is absolutely the heart of being a human being. And that's what I'm trying to work out in this book. Still.
Yeah, I think you're right. It isn't unfinished. And I mean, one of the things I want to ask before we open to the audience and to the people watching online is about legacy, because you're engaging in that legacy. You're trying to change it, but also legacy hangs heavy on you too, doesn't it? Your family's legacy. You've decided to sell some of the things you've inherited, haven't you, to give to a good cause to refugee organizations. But what do you do with that legacy, and what do you want to pass on to your family, or do you want to spare them?
Well, sparing them is very significant. So, I made sure that the family archive, which was huge, was donated to the Jewish Museum in Vienna. No one needs to go through those boxes again, unless they really want to. And the Netscape collection is on long-term loan for 10 years to the Jewish Museum in Vienna.
But that's what you sold some of, isn't it?
And then, during 2018, we sold 74 of them for the Refugee Council. Raised a huge amount of money. So it's what it is, Lennie, it's actually trying to find the agency in stories. So you can write a book and you think that's done. And I mean, the thing was, I thought when I wrote The Hare with Amber Eyes that I'd done it, I'd finished. I really thought, phew.
Yeah.
And then the letters started coming, really, really complicated letters from people around the world.
Response to the book.
Responses.
Yeah.
And then there's the whole sense of where do you go with that story? What do you do with the things you make? Where do you want them to be in the world? So it's not straightforward, but I'm desperately trying to spare the next generation down from having to having to go through some of those documents. You know, I really am. And this, I don't know where this is going to go, but it's, I mean, that's too late, isn't it? I mean, it's, it's published.
I'm going to, as I said, I'm going to open in just a couple of seconds, but one of the things I'm very struck by, again, sorry to read you so closely, but you know, every line is great
this
as
is
far as
the first live event. Actually ask real questions.
Oh.
Thank you.
I'm just going to tell, I mean, this is not a question, but I'm just going to tell you things like the way that Edmund describes certain things is he uses other kinds of, like use writing words to describe furniture. So everything in this house is capitalized, underlined, illuminated, you know, writer's tools to describe furniture. I love that. But the last thing I want to ask you about is the color of porcelain, because that's very interesting. So lots of the other things we're talking about fade or crumble or whatever, but porcelain, the color stays true, doesn't it? And that's your medium.
Yeah. So porcelain stays true, but it breaks.
Yeah.
You know, so I mean, I'm a very slow learner. You know, I work with porcelain, and it's taken me decades to work out that porcelain is the great migratory material. It's the material that begins in one place, China, comes along the Silk Road, reinvented. So it's that extraordinary embedded storytelling. And the other thing is that it breaks, and that actually, so you have to live as a maker of porcelain with looking at the world and looking at shards, looking at brokenness. And then you can choose what to do with it. You can either go, well, that's a disaster, that's the end, but actually it's much more interesting looking at brokenness. You know, it's not that you want to sort of knit it all back together again, though I do use kintsugi, this beautiful Japanese technique of marking out loss with gold. But actually working with a material which breaks is you know, it's what I do.
Dangerous?
It's realistic. It's really realistic. You know, it's not pretending that everything is forever. You know, and shards are diasporic. They go in all directions. They, you know, but when you pick a shard up out of the ground, as I've done in Jingdezhen and in China and in Dresden, and what you've got is you've got the beginning of a story. You've got something which is jagged and a bit painful, but the beginning of a story. So you know, it's not bad. Words and pots, you know, it's not. They do work together.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lennie.
Thank you
so much.
We don't go away.
Okay.
You have to sit there now and be asked questions. So can we, I have a tablet here, which is going to, if I press the right button, yes. So we have questions from around the world, in fact, and then we'll take some questions. So why don't we start, because we're live, let's start in the real room. Is there a question? Okay, I can see there are two. And, okay, you get to be filmed, I'm afraid. Come on, Brave, you like that.
Right. You expose, one of the great myths of France was that the war was spent with the resistance busy, whatever. I can't think of the name of the town as I sit here, but in the south of France, there's a museum of the resistance. And I remember remarking, well, they couldn't build, even in a large country like France, they couldn't find land big enough to build a museum of the collaboration. And I say it's more a comment than a question, but particularly what you're saying there. The idea that the repression and murder of the Jews was a German thing, it wasn't. It was done entirely by the Vichy government.
It's a good comment, and I'm glad you asked it and said that out loud, because the first statute against the Jews is by Vichy France. It's not pushed by Germany. It's a bit of self-determination by Pétain in Vichy France. And you want to see real cruelty, you go to Vichy France. You go and see what the French immediately started to do against friends and neighbors and colleagues. It's extraordinary. And so, yes, it's a hugely painful subject to bring up, but I think it really does bear the sort of cold telling, which I hope I do in this book. I sort of change my tone for one very, very long chapter where I say what's happened. But you're absolutely right. And collaboration, it's painful reading. Thank you. Yeah.
And somebody in the front, and just before you go to, I can't see you exactly, I'm just going to read one from the audience at home.
Yeah.
From somebody called John J. Can you see a relationship between your ceramist creativity and your writing creativity?
I am the same person. so, yes, I think I can. I mean, but I've been doing both for so long that it's quite difficult to sort of tease it out. I suppose I do think of, when I'm writing, I absolutely feel the shape of words and the shape of paragraphs and sentences. And in fact, actually, this is letters. And so letters, often very short letters. And so when I see a short letter on an empty white page, it gives me a feeling of being pretty close to how I see a group of vessels together. It's got that same kind of energy, or that same feeling of connection between space and object.
Yeah.
So I've always loved the sound and weight of words, and I hope that my pots have the same kind of have the same feeling to them as poetry, really.
No, that's nice.
I'm just a failed poet, basically. All of this is an attempt to make poetry, either in clay or...
That'll probably be the next question. Okay, and here. You can take your mask off if you like. It's up to you.
It's okay. Thank you for an absolutely fascinating talk, and I cannot wait to read the book.
Thank you.
One of the parts of The Hare with the Amber Eyes that struck me the most was you talking about the creation of the Ringstrasse. And I just wanted to understand what you thought about the relationship between that kind of that creation of the artificiality, or the sort of, but it's still beautiful, but still, you know, very new ring, and the creation and the curation of objects. So the relationship between kind of that, the history of finding the candelabra that Madame de Pompadour had and putting it on the same sideboard, and creating something new that sort of says something to that you know, history. Yeah, that's the question. And again, thank you so much for fascinating talk.
Thank you. So it's a really interesting question. So it's a question. I mean, you've brought up the Ringstrasse, this great, extraordinary 1860s, 1870s creation of a great ring round Vienna. Building of museums, building of the university, of the opera house, and the building of all these different palais, these huge houses, most of which were occupied by very well-off Jewish families that have come from the Levant or from Odessa or from wherever. So new houses being built in this great architecture, all of them looking a bit like the houses in the Rue de Monceau in Paris, this area of Paris which is occupied by people who've come from everywhere and want to become Parisian. So what happens is this. You build your house, it's bigger than anything you can ever imagine. It possibly has pilasters, it certainly has gilding on it, possibly a statue or two. But it's a family house. It's where you want to show your family off and to create a settled new beginning. And so what you do is you create this kind of storytelling. You might collect French furniture, or in my Viennese family, you create extraordinary rooms where you have painted on the ceilings Jewish themes, the coronation of Queen Esther or the destruction of the enemies of Zion. So what you're trying to do in each case is to try and tell some aspect of who you want to be. Jewish, Zionist, possibly, or Parisian and haute bourgeois in the case of the Camondo family. But in all cases, it's so entirely particular. It's one family trying to make themselves more Parisian than the Parisians, or more Viennese than the Viennese. You know, and that, of course, has this long, painful tale, as you have read in my first book.
And Medea says, has access been easy to all the archives you've needed to research? Have you faced any hostility?
No, the archives have been extraordinary and wonderful and open. And of course, it's been a strange process because there in the Musée Camondo, for 30 years, an archivist has been carefully, with incredible passion, has been carefully putting this archive back together again. You know, you have to imagine, you know, all that grandeur. You go up these stairs, and they get more and more and more dusty and worn away, and then you go into these archive rooms up there, and there she is, and she's been carefully tabulating the menus and the things. And no, I've been greeted with huge warmth there. Unlike working, I have to say, in some bits of Vienna, or you know, where there was, I mean, this I think has changed now, but 18 years ago, when I was beginning 15 years ago to do the book, there was the occasional real kind of, you know, not interested kind of moment. There is a beautiful new book called by James Macaulay that's just come out, which The House of Fragile Things, which I profoundly recommend. A wonderful American scholar who's also, it came out at the exact same time as my book, amazing, and it charts both the Camondo story and also some of the other Jewish, French Jewish families, and hugely recommended. And my God, he went into more archives than I did.
Yes.
Mazel tov.
I hope he felt that wasn't devastated when he saw you'd published a book at the same time on the same subject.
We've done things together.
Yes, I saw that.
And
that's very good.
He's a great scholar, and he's kindred,
okay.
Kindred spirit.
Oh, good. Is there another question here in the audience?
I just picked up a copy of your the British Museum's book on your Library of Exile this week, which I hadn't come across before, and read it. It's fascinating. Can you tell us a little bit more about that project, and how on earth did you transport these large porcelain pieces around the world?
With great difficulty. Actually trying to get porcelain into Venice is actually really difficult. The boats bob, and actually shards. So the project came powerfully out of a feeling of recognition, really, of my own roots, but also of this horror, really, the kind of manning of borders, all these borders going up everywhere, and people saying who should belong and what. And I was so conscious of what we owe, this incredible literature of exile. As I say, from Ovid onwards, you know, you go from Ovid to Dante to Voltaire, but then, my God, you go into every century and you look and you see what people who've been forced into exile have given, and that literature. So I started to sort of collect those books and bring them together. And then in Venice, during the Biennale, 2019 Biennale, I created this library. So I'm now a librarian, as well as an archivist. And on the outsides of the library, it was a sort of structure, a bit smaller than this room. I put painted porcelain slip, and then wrote a history of all the destroyed libraries of the world. And people have been burning books, you know, before Constantinople, Alexandria onwards, right up to Mosul, the destruction of the great library in Mosul by ISIS. And then inside were all these books, and you just picked up books. It wasn't an art installation. You picked books up and found books you loved. And there were 4 big porcelain installations called Psalm, because of course the Psalms are great songs of exile. And then it went on, and it was difficult, transporting to Dresden, to a destroyed part of a palace in Dresden where the bombing happened, and then to the British Museum, again to a bit of the museum that was bombed during the Blitz. And now, and this is the really cool bit, and I'm glad you asked me this question, 2 bits of news. One is at the end of the project last year, I donated all the books to Mosul, and they've arrived. And they are now in the rebuilding library of the University of Mosul. And the outside structure is being rebuilt in the Warburg Library in London, which is one of the great exiled libraries. It's a great library in the University of London. So off they go. Books migrating again, but ending up in Mosul. So that's a good place for them to be.
I think we have time for one more question. If we have an in-house question, I'll do that. Otherwise, okay. Serena, this picks up the collector item. As a writer, do you feel you are a collector too? You are collecting and curating the stories of the past?
Yes, absolutely yes. And weirdly, the last 3 weeks, I've been working on my own archive.
Oh, right.
Which has been a sort of a thing that's escaped me over the last decades.
Are you tidy?
There's just quite a lot of it.
Okay.
And actually, one of my sons has been helping with an intern, a couple of interns, and we've been bringing things together. And actually collecting, absolutely yes. I kind of think of myself as walking sort of in a minimalist way through the world, just occasionally making something or writing something. It's absolute bollocks. So untrue. Always collecting too many books, vast amounts of books, huge amounts of paper, notebooks like this, necessary shards that I picked up on my travels, and the odd picture. So actually, it's complete nonsense. So yes, I can't remember what the question was, but the answer is probably yes.
Collecting.
Probably yes.
I hope there's other people in the audience like me who have an awful lot of stuff in our houses. And now you've given us all pride. Pride in objects. We will not give them away. We know what they mean. And that's why I warmed to that, with the idea of touching things and how that does get to the heart of things. So thank you.
I've loved this.
I want to say
I've loved
thank
this.
you.
And I've loved being live so much. It's been such a delight. Thank you, Lennie.
Thank you. I want to say, just to finish, that this year's online festival is pay what you can, not to the people who have come and had the glory of being in this live performance for the first time. But if you're watching at home and you've enjoyed this, we'd be very grateful if you would consider paying for the event or making a contribution so we can go on making this wonderful festival available to many people as we can. Every bit helps. So if you're at home and you want to make a contribution, that's good, and you want to buy the book, go to shop.edfest.co.uk. And for those in-house, we're now off to the bookshop. And thank you, Edmund. Thank you so much. That was really moving.